This session focuses on compensation and reward setting. Part 1 is concerned with theorising pay and considering how we should pay individuals. My name is Amy Humphries and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England. If you have any questions on any of the content, please email me at the email address below. The main objectives of this session are to first overview different theories relating to pay, second to consider how best to set pay, and lastly to discuss the importance of different approaches to paying compensation. In the academic literature, just as in business, the main questions when we think about pay are how much should we pay, what can we measure and use to determine this pay, and lastly, how should we pay? There are four main schools of thought when it comes to how pay should be set. Economics, often said to be the approach based on rationality and logic. Institutional economics, which considers the influence of institutions, including the law and socially imposed rules. Sociology, so power and cultural implications of pay and compensation, including socially accepted traditions. And psychology, the impact pay and rewards have at the individual level, particularly the impact on behaviour and attitudes. We're now going to look at each of these theories in greater detail. Economists use labour market theory when thinking about compensation. The assumption of the labour market theory is that compensation should be set at a level that maximises individuals' and organisations' income. However, such compensation can only be achieved in an environment where each party has perfect knowledge and information. Unfortunately for us, this environment is unlikely to be the environment we operate in. So we must apply the principles of economic theory rather than being caught up in the specifics. All employees have an amount in their minds that, for them, will compensate them for the leisure time they have given up in order to work. Below this amount, employees will prefer not to work. Similarly, organisations also have an amount in their mind as to what they are willing to pay. Above this amount, they would prefer not to employ the individual, or indeed they could not afford to do so. According to the labour market theory, we should pay the amount that satisfies each party, so where demand equals supply. Under this theory, it is the market that regulates the price of labour. But is it as simple to say that if you approach your compensation by only considering economics, you will get the most from your workforce? Many would suggest that if you pay the minimum amount to keep your employees in employment, you will not attract and retain the best workers. Indeed, good workers will know that they can get a higher pay elsewhere, and they will be attracted by even a marginal wage increase. This makes good workers prime candidates for poaching. It is also unlikely that employees will be loyal to the organisation, as they are not offering them anything in addition to other employers. It is suggested in the literature that employment follows a gift exchange model, whereby the bigger the gift, reward and compensation in this case, given to employees, the more they will feel obliged to give in terms of effort and productivity in return. Of course, if the gift is not appreciated, the employees are less likely to put in effort to their work, and higher supervision levels will be needed to ensure required output is produced. An alternative framework to the classic economic theory is institutional economics. Institutional economics accepts that there must be variations in compensation. It isn't as simple as supply and demand across all the labour market. These variations can be explained through understanding the role of institutions. As said, markets are not as simple as supply and demand. There are other forces acting in the market that shape wages and compensation. Unions, employment law, social conventions, traditions, and culture all have much effect and impact on compensation. This theory also considers the need for pay equality. In the UK, we know that there is strict law relating to discrimination based on demographic information, such as gender and disability. But we must also consider equality in terms of different roles and jobs within the organisation. Should, for example, the head of accounts be paid the same as the head of HR? Questions like this can be argued both ways, but the decisions made should be based on the level of responsibility, required skill, and importance of output, instead of personal inclination or intuition. These decisions have to be made at the very start of constructing a compensation package because they become very difficult to change later on. However, there are other schools of thought removed from that of economics. Sociologists, for example, argue that it is social forces and perceptions that shape wages and not simply supply and demand. Some occupations command higher wages, not based on rationality, but because they command more power. This power can come from regulation, such as licensing, where occupations are closed to only those with the necessary license, and therefore these individuals have a monopolistic control over their work. They can demand higher rates, and employers have very little choice other than to go along with it. However, power could also come from unique knowledge, which is not necessarily the result of higher qualifications or regulation, but nevertheless is not known by the average person. IT, for example. Beyond power, sociologists suggest that tradition also plays a huge role in compensation. Socially accepted customs and practices are hard to change, but have a big impact over employee expectation and approach to negotiation. For example, bankers have traditionally been paid an above-average basic rate, but one of the biggest components of their rewards packages has been bonuses. As such, those applying for jobs in the banking industry will focus their negotiations on bonuses. Understanding somebody's background and their expectations allows managers and organisations to manage the negotiation process and attract the right people. Our last school of thought is that of psychology. Psychology states that beyond microeconomics and considerations of institutions and indeed social factors, it is the individual employee who plays a big role in the effectiveness of any compensation package. As employers, organisations need to understand what motivates their employees at the individual level. These assumptions are based in motivational theory, as covered in previous sessions. Typical theories to draw upon are Taylor, Maslow, McGregor and Adams, to name but a few. It is all about knowing what will motivate your workers and what different types of rewards they assign value to. If you give compensation that is not valued, it is going to cost you, but it will not yield the positive results. Please look back to the earlier material for more information on this. In summary, how can these different theories help us in a practical sense? Well, the first step will always be to determine what the organisation can afford and who it will be willing to employ at this level. We then have to consider who would be willing to work for this level of compensation. However, understanding the role of institutions and social factors will help us tailor the compensation packages so employees' expectations are further met. And of course, this will improve the likelihood of increased tenure and performance. Considering individual employees and what motivates them will also improve the effectiveness of compensation packages in terms of increased productivity and employee satisfaction. Although as organisations grow, individual analysis becomes difficult. When organisations are small, such personal approaches can form strong organisational cultures that can continue for years to come. Part 2 of this session is going to look at the practicalities and steps one would take in setting pay boundaries and scales.